Okay, let's unpack this. When we talk about justice and correction, the conversation almost immediately divides into um, two warring sides,
Yeah,
punishment versus rehabilitation.
it always does.
And for centuries, society has struggled to find a sustainable, effective balance between, the need to hold people accountable for their actions and the moral obligation to offer a path back to productivity.
Which often leaves us with a correctional system that, frankly, doesn't really achieve either goal very well.
Exactly. You get this revolving door of recidivism.
And that struggle is precisely why we're doing this deep dive. It's why these alternative models, however radical they might seem, really command our attention.
Right.
The traditional model is so frequently critiqued for its failure to truly reform. It relies so heavily on confinement, on isolation. It contains individuals, sure, but it often fails to prepare them for any kind of successful reintegration.
Which makes the social and economic cost just astronomical in the long run.
Absolutely.
And today, we have an exceptionally unique and incredibly detailed source proposing a radical, virtue-based alternative. So our mission here is pure architectural analysis. We're going to dissect the nuts and bolts of this proposed operational model, and we are pulling exclusively from excerpts of a single source, the Multiverse Journal Index number 2213. Proposals to heal fatherless nations, jailed single mothers, soul-sickened adult male children.
Which was written by Stevenwork and dated May 20, 2025.
That's the one.
Now, before we dive into the structural elements of these proposed rehabilitation camps, we have to immediately and transparently address the nature of this source material's framing.
Please do. It's unavoidable, and it's, I think, critical to set the boundaries for our analysis right up front.
The introduction to this journal entry uses extremely strong, often religiously and socially charged language to describe the current state of affairs.
It really does.
It employs phrases like fatherless nation. It refers to the government using terms like hate-filled, evil, feminized, devouring mother, soul-dead government. And it even references synagogue of Satan's scripted following torturing witches.
Yeah, that language is certainly present, and it sets a very specific, highly charged ideological and cultural context for the proposal that follows it.
And so our mission here, and the sole focus of this deep dive for you, the listener, is structural analysis. We are strictly focusing on the detailed correctional proposal that immediately follows this highly charged framing.
Okay.
We are not engaging with or endorsing the ideological foundation provided in the opening remarks. Our job is to impartially extract the structure, the principles, and the specific mechanical steps of the proposed system for your intellectual review.
Absolutely. We are extracting the operating manual for a potential new model. The core mission is to understand the architecture of these rehabilitation camps and how they are designed operationally to transform incarcerated men into what the author describes as honorable and productive citizens.
Think of this as an exercise in comparative painology. What are the concrete operational differences between this intensely virtue-focused proposed model and the status quo?
Right. What are the specific mechanisms designed to generate genuine, measurable reform?
Exactly.
So let's begin with the source's implied critique of the current status quo, which, that forms the justification for this whole proposal. The standard system, as the source argues, struggles because it treats criminality as a solely punitive problem. It relies too heavily on prolonged confinement and isolation.
And that approach, they argue, often just worsens the psychological and moral state of the inmates. It fails to address the root ethical deficits that led to the crime in the first place.
It's a container, not a cure.
Precisely. The core critique is that the existing model is fundamentally reactive. It contains the immediate threat, but it doesn't foster proactive change. It contains the individual, but it doesn't heal, educate, or elevate the moral framework.
So it neglects the internal scaffolding needed for a successful transition back to society.
Yes, exactly that, the internal scaffolding.
Which brings us to the rehabilitation camp model. The source makes the camp's purpose explicitly clear, using language that speaks of transformation. It is not merely to confine, but to reform and elevate.
And that right there, that's a philosophical declaration that demands a completely different operational structure from standard incarceration.
It has to.
It does. The defined goal is to instill a deep, internalized sense of discipline, purpose, and moral virtue. This system is designed from the ground up to ensure these men are prepared to rejoin society as dignified members, not just released individuals carrying the stigma and, the skill deficit incarceration.
And the source stresses repeatedly that the methodology must uplift and inspire.
Yes, and never, under any circumstances, involve humiliation or degradation. Dignity is the starting point for moral elevation. That is a non-negotiable principle in this text.
Let's get into the structure then, starting with Principle 1, moral and social education. Now, this sounds far more intensive than, say, a typical mandatory GED class or basic civics.
Oh, much more.
How does the journal propose structuring this daily moral instruction?
The structure detailed involves an intensive, highly prescribed daily routine. This isn't passive learning. It requires active engagement through daily lectures, structured readings, and guided discussions focused intensely on specific virtues.
And the curriculum isn't arbitrary.
Not at all. The source clearly lists the foundational virtues deemed necessary for honorable citizenship: honesty, self-discipline, accountability, and charity.
That's fascinating. If we take those 4 virtues, honesty, self-discipline, accountability, and charity, how does the camp practically enforce them? I mean, how does the daily schedule ensure these become internalized behaviors rather than just, things you memorize for a test?
Well, the source implies a constant feedback loop. Take honesty, for example. This is enforced through a zero-tolerance policy on deception.
Even in small matters.
Especially in small matters, things regarding work completion or interactions with staff. The only path to advancement in what they call the privilege system is absolute truthfulness. It forces men to face their actions and admit shortcomings, often publicly during group discussions.
Which builds the foundation of integrity required for all the other virtues.
Exactly. It has to come first.
And self-discipline. That seems like the central challenge for many men entering the system, especially those with impulse control issues.
Right. Self-discipline is linked directly to the rigorous schedule, which we'll get into, but also to measured responses during confrontations or setbacks.
So every task is a lesson.
Every single one. The source suggests that every task, from making their bed perfectly to finishing a complex trade assignment, is a micro-lesson in delayed gratification and self-control. Failure to meet a deadline isn't just penalized. It becomes a case study in self-discipline failure, which is then analyzed in a group setting.
Wow. Okay. Then there is accountability. In a traditional prison, accountability is usually external, measured by, time served or rules followed.
Here, the goal is internal accountability. The men are taught that their actions, past and present, affect their entire social circle, especially their families and the community they want to rejoin.
And that's where the civic education comes in.
Yes. The source mandates specific civic education on social order and the responsibilities of citizenship. The implication is that criminality is not just a personal failing, but a failure to understand and uphold one's duties within the social contract. The camp aims to remediate that foundational knowledge, building a new moral framework from the ground up.
And finally, charity. That's a surprising one for a correctional facility. I mean, how do you teach a virtue based on giving while you're incarcerated?
It's a great question, and it's operationalized through group projects designed to benefit the camp or the outside community.
For example?
Things like building benches for local parks or dedicating agricultural surplus to a food bank. This is labor performed not for individual gain or skill building, but purely for the benefit of others. It forces the men to look outward and engage in positive, selfless contribution.
Which directly counteracts the self-centered impulses that often underlie criminal behavior.
That's the theory. This integrated daily curriculum, supported by mandatory discussions, forms the backbone of the reform process.
Okay, so principle number 2 ties morality directly to the physical state, physical discipline, and health. This link between body and mind is often theorized, but frequently overlooked in standard correctional facilities that focus primarily on security.
The source views physical health as absolutely essential for moral clarity and personal strength. The philosophy is clear. If the body is weak or neglected or constantly seeking artificial stimulation, the will to reform is believed to be similarly compromised.
So it's an integrated, holistic approach.
Completely. Daily, structured physical training is required to promote both self-discipline and bodily health. Physical rigor prepares the mind for moral work.
That sounds like a highly demanding schedule. And support systems are a huge part of ensuring this rigor is sustainable and, dignified.
They are, and the source is very specific on this point. Provision of balanced, nutritious meals and readily available medical care is non-negotiable.
That makes sense.
If the goal is elevation and dignity, the baseline provision of health and sustenance must reflect that dignity. You can't expect a man to focus on profound accountability if he's malnourished or suffering from untreated dental pain. This provision elevates the camp experience above mere subsistence living.
It establishes a respectful baseline.
Yes.
Now, here's the structural element that truly separates this model from traditional prisons. Principle 3, the guard as mentor and exemplar. The integrity of the entire system seems to rest on the quality and moral standing of the staff.
This is a critical structural difference. In a traditional prison, the guard's primary function is security, order, authority.
Right, they're enforcers.
In this model, the guard's role is elevated exponentially. He is not just an enforcer, he is a mentor, a teacher, and a living exemplar of moral virtue. His moral authority must supersede his legal authority.
But how does the proposal ensure this incredibly high standard? I mean, it requires staff to be almost moral paragons.
It mandates extremely rigorous selection criteria. It requires that guards must be chosen from the finest citizens, men who have already demonstrated deep self-restraint, honor, compassion, and unwavering ethical consistency in their own lives.
That sounds almost impossibly demanding to staff at scale. I mean, if the system were implemented nationally, where would you find enough people who meet the standard of being the finest citizens and who are willing to work in a correctional environment?
That is the immense practical friction point. The source addresses this by suggesting the position must be elevated in prestige and compensation, a form of national service perhaps, to attract the right caliber of individuals.
So a different kind of motivation.
A different kind. The logic is compelling, if challenging. The inmates must have positive, visible, and constant examples of honor to emulate. If the men are to be reformed, the reformers must themselves be impeccable examples of the virtues being taught.
So the guards aren't just trained in security protocols. Their entire existence within the camp has to be a lesson. Their conduct must reflect the highest standard of virtue to inspire respect and emulation. Does the source detail what their non-security duties look like?
Yes, extensively. They are expected to participate actively in the daily moral discussions, not just supervise them. They act as trade apprenticeship masters, working side by side with the men in the fields and workshops.
So they're leading by doing.
Leading by do, exactly. They participate in the physical training regimen. This dramatically changes the entire power dynamic. It's a relationship based on earned moral authority and shared discipline, rather than a hierarchy based purely on the possession of keys and a uniform. The guard is constantly modeling the virtues he expects the men to internalize.
Okay, so moving beyond the philosophical foundation and into the practical application, the source is clear. Meaningful, productive work is the engine of reform.
It is.
It aims not just to occupy time, but specifically to target skill building and prepare men for post-release employment that restores their self-sufficiency.
The transformative power of work is seen as the central therapy. The belief system outlined argues that idleness breeds vice and psychological deterioration, whereas productive, skilled labor, especially when performed collaboratively, restores dignity.
And it provides tangible evidence of competence.
Tangible evidence, and it carves a viable path back into society.
Let's break down the work and trade training. How are inmates assigned labor, and how does this ensure maximum benefit?
The assignment criteria are designed to be pragmatic and restorative. Work is assigned according to the inmate's existing physical capabilities and intellectual capacities.
So it's an individualized assessment upon entry.
Yes, a profile that matches the man not just to a job, but to a suitable trade or skill pathway, which maximizes the chance of genuine skill acquisition and subsequent employment.
That focus on individualized placement suggests the camp must offer an enormous range of vocational training. What specific areas of labor does the source highlight?
The source lists broad foundational and practical skills. It suggests the camp complex would need substantial physical infrastructure. They mention agricultural labor, which teaches patience, resource management, and physical stamina.
Okay.
They emphasize skilled craftsmanship, like carpentry, masonry, and welding trades that offer high-value, marketable skills. They also include technical skills and apprenticeships, maybe related to equipment maintenance or mechanics, and even space for creative trades, recognizing that some individuals benefit more from non-physical artistic endeavors.
That diverse structure ensures that the skills acquired are the bridge back to society. It directly counteracts the standard prison outcome of, minimal, non-marketable skill acquisition.
Exactly. The labor serves two purposes. It reinforces the moral education through practical application, and it provides an economic parachute upon release. A man learns accountability through the rigorous demands of a technical apprenticeship and self-discipline through the physical demands of agricultural work.
So the marketable skill acquired becomes the final, tangible proof of his internal change and societal readiness.
That's the idea.
But work must be tied to motivation. The source details a staged process of gradual reintegration and parole, driven by a defined privilege system. We need the nuts and bolts of that system. What are the tiers, and what does a man gain by progressing?
The privilege system is the behavioral metric of the camp. It essentially replaces time served with virtue earned. The source implies a minimum of 5 distinct stages, achieved only when the inmate demonstrates measurable, consistent reform.
Okay, walk us through the typical progression starting from arrival.
Tier 1, intensive observation. This is the entry level, mandatory for all men. Movement is highly restricted to the immediate living quarters, workshops, and communal eating areas. No unsupervised movement. Privileges are minimal. Basic library access, limited family communication, letters only.
So it reinforces immediate obedience and adaptation to the structure.
Correct. Then, when they demonstrate foundational obedience and buy into the moral curriculum, they can progress.
To Tier 2.
To Tier 2, foundational trust. Here, men are eligible for the 2-man work units we'll discuss later, allowing them to engage in collaborative labor under close supervision. Privileges expand to include controlled, scheduled video communications with immediate family.
So they can begin repairing familial bonds.
Under the camp supervision, yes. They also gain broader access to the camp's educational resources.
And Tier 3.
Tier 3, earned responsibility. This is where the camp starts testing internalized discipline. Men are assigned to the 4-man work units and given increased responsibilities, like managing materials or leading the cleanup of their work section.
And what are the critical privileges here?
Potential eligibility for day-long supervised work trips off-site, perhaps to deliver goods or materials, and extended visitation hours with family, including supervised physical contact.
That sounds like a major motivational hurdle. Having something tangible to look forward to that isn't just freedom.
It is, because the incentive is tied to repairing their dignity in their family life. Then you have Tier 4, subcamp eligibility.
This is the big one.
This is the threshold for the autonomous projects. The men in this tier have demonstrated deep-seated ethical consistency, self-mastery, and 0 recorded disciplinary infractions for a sustained period, often 6 months or more. They receive the privilege of significant unsupervised autonomy for the construction projects.
And critically, the source suggests they may begin receiving compensation for their labor.
Yes.
Compensation. That was a key logistical question. Does the source detail where that money goes? Is it used for victim restitution, camp upkeep, or savings for the inmate?
The journal proposes a tripartite system which reflects the concept of accountability and charity. A fixed percentage of earned wages, often suggested as 10 to 20%, is mandated for victim restitution or a general fund for community uplift. A small portion, enough to cover non-essential personal goods, is available for immediate use within the camp store. The vast majority, however, goes into a mandatory savings trust fund, accessible only upon release.
So the men leave with capital. It provides a true economic start and reinforces the dignity of their labor.
That's the goal. And the final stage is Tier 5. Pre-parole transition.
Right.
This tier grants maximum camp privileges, often involving housing in segregated, less restrictive units, and full participation in open labor programs outside the main camp walls, often involving independent employment arranged by the camp. This is the final screening before transition to supervised parole and, critically, employment placements.
So the camp isn't just releasing men, it is actively placing them into jobs. It's providing a soft, supported landing back into the free community.
That's the model. The consistent message throughout is that the emphasis is always on reform and uplift, distinguishing this model from a traditional punitive system focused purely on time served.
The clock starts ticking toward productive citizenship, not just toward release day.
Exactly.
Now we have to address the major practical challenge for any correctional model. The vast majority of incarcerated individuals do not fit neatly into a single mold, and many enter the system with severe impulse control deficiencies or a history of profound violence.
The hard cases.
The proposal tackles this necessity with specific staged interventions designed to manage violent behavior while maintaining dignity and safety for everyone.
And any model built on the foundation of dignity and moral education must have a robust, humane, yet utterly secure mechanism for dealing with men who pose an immediate threat to themselves or others. The source addresses this necessity head-on by creating a specialized wing.
They start with initial confinement and intensive correction. What does that environment look like beyond simple isolation?
So these individuals, those with documented serious impulse control problems or histories of profound aggression, are initially housed in controlled, isolated sections. They're subject to rigorous, highly monitored oversight. But the crucial detail is the design philosophy.
Right.
The source explicitly states these sections are not for prolonged punitive segregation. They are designed for intensive correction.
So isolation is a tool for safety and focus, providing the necessary distance for reform to begin without the danger of immediate conflict, but it is not retribution.
Precisely. It creates the necessary calm space for reform to begin. And once contained, the proposal focuses heavily on therapeutic and moral intervention, which is highly integrated.
Who is conducting this intensive intervention, and how do they combine what are often seen as disparate therapeutic approaches?
Specialized personnel are mandated. Counselors, often with backgrounds in psychology or social work, and dedicated chaplains. The source advocates for an integrated approach, combining religious instruction focused on forgiveness, self-control, and moral duty with established methods like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
That combination is sophisticated. How does the religious instruction reinforce the principles of CBT?
Well, the source suggests they are used synergistically. CBT teaches the men to identify the thought patterns that lead to impulsive or aggressive actions, the cognitive distortion cycle.
Right, the stinking thinking.
Exactly. The religious instruction then provides a robust, moral, and ethical framework drawing on tenets of accountability and self-mastery to replace those distorted thought patterns. The ultimate goal of this combination is to assist the inmate in gaining self-mastery by providing both the technical tools of CBT and the moral motivation of religious instruction.
And the staff working in these wings must be specially chosen for their emotional stability, even more so than the general camp guards.
Oh, absolutely. The source emphasizes that the staff dealing with the most volatile men need an exceptionally high level of patience, self-restraint, and virtue. Their presence itself is part of the therapeutic environment. A constant, calm, predictable display of self-control that models the very behavior the men are struggling to acquire.
So they aren't merely security, they are specialized behavioral mentors.
That's the idea. The structure then pivots back to physical labor as a disciplinary tool. And this isn't just general labor. It seems highly targeted specifically for the violent prisoners who are beginning to stabilize.
This is a core part of their rehabilitation plan.
It is. The rationale is rooted in the belief that immense constructive physical labor has a transformative effect on unruly men. The source argues that those prone to violence often possess an excess of physical energy or aggression that, if left unchanneled, turns destructive.
So rather than letting that energy fester in isolation, they channel it into production. What specific tasks are assigned?
They are given the most physically demanding but meaningful tasks available. The activities listed are highly physical and foundational. Agricultural work requiring manual soil preparation and harvesting, stone cutting for construction, or timber work involving felling and milling.
Things that demand massive physical exertion.
And focus, which theoretically exhausts aggressive tendencies and channels internal energy into immediate, visible, productive, and valuable outcomes.
The source adds a historical reference here, noting that the structure of hard physical labor coupled with moral instruction is historically effective in fostering discipline.
It is. It's an ancient concept, the connection between sweat, physical exhaustion, and moral clarity applied to a modern correctional challenge.
But the absolute line that cannot be crossed, even in the intensive correction wings, is the need for strict accountability with dignity.
This is the hardest balance to maintain operationally.
It has to be. If a violent prisoner lashes out or breaches discipline, what does swift but humane consequence look like?
The consequences for violent outbursts or breaches must be immediate but non-physical. This typically means a return to temporary, absolute isolation or the suspension of all earned privileges. These measures are designed solely to reinforce self-control.
And to emphasize that the only way forward is through compliance with the virtue model.
Yes. The critical difference is the source's hard line. Physical mistreatment, humiliation, or any form of dehumanization is never permitted. The dignity of the individual, regardless of their crime or temporary failure, remains paramount.
Because that dignity is the foundation upon which reform is built.
Exactly. That dignity clause is the operational barrier preventing the specialized management wing from descending into simple punitive cruelty.
So the goal is always to treat the outburst as a failure of internalized discipline, not as a reason to strip away the man's humanity.
Correct. And the men in these wings have a clear, measurable path out. The focus is always on the next metric of progress, demonstrating enough consistent self-control to move into the collaborative phase 1 of reintegration.
Okay, this section describes the true operational innovation of the camp, especially for the violent men who have stabilized and begun to show reform. It's a staged process of building trust through collaborative work that moves them out of that controlled environment.
This phased approach is the system's genius. It's designed to systematically reintroduce men to social responsibility and collaboration, forcing them to prove their self-mastery through earned trust rather than mandated obedience.
This is where the internal change becomes externally measurable.
Absolutely.
So phase 1 is pairing and team integration, the two-man unit. What triggers this transition from the isolated environment, and what does measurable self-control specifically entail?
The trigger is highly detailed. It requires 0 disciplinary incidents for a sustained period, typically defined in the journal as 3 consecutive months, coupled with active participation in moral discussions, and, crucially, successful completion of highly demanding, solitary physical tasks.
And once that threshold is met,
the inmate is paired with another prisoner of similar progress, selected by the staff to ensure complementary skills and temperaments.
and their task is designed to reinforce social skills and cooperation.
Absolutely. They engage in collaborative physical labor. 2 men moving stones for a foundation, or 2 men felling and loading timber tasks that physically cannot be completed efficiently by 1 person.
So it requires immediate cooperation.
Cooperation, communication, and mutual reliance. The 2-man team increases social aptitude, reduces isolationist tendencies, and forces the men to trust another human being for successful task completion.
If the two-man team succeeds consistently, demonstrating not just completion but reliable partnership, they move to phase 2, larger team reliability, forming the 4-man unit.
Yes, successful 2-man teams are combined, again, based on staff assessment of compatibility and demonstrated reliability. The prerequisite here is proving they can manage the increased complexity of a larger social dynamic.
More personalities, more potential friction.
Exactly, and they have to master that before they can move to the most autonomous stage of the entire program. This is the final layer of institutional risk mitigation before massive trust is granted.
Phase 3. This is where the element of trust becomes massive, perhaps even reckless, if not managed perfectly. Expedition and autonomous projects leading to the construction of a subcamp. This is the most unique, high-trust operational detail of the proposal.
It is a phenomenal step change in earned trust. These 4-man units, having proven their reliability in the highly structured camp, are assigned independent projects outside the main camp walls for 2 to 3 days at a time. They are essentially on expedition.
I have to pause here and introduce some skepticism. This relies on massive trust, especially since these teams may contain men who entered the system as violent offenders. What specific safeguards does the journal suggest to prevent these men from simply failing the assignment, fleeing with tools, or worse? This is a huge security risk.
That is the central operational challenge, and the source addresses it by saying the safeguards are moral, not physical.
What does that mean?
The security relies almost entirely on the men's internalized fear of losing the trust they have fought so hard to earn, which would mean an immediate return to Tier 1 isolation and the potential loss of their parole eligibility. The selection process is the primary safeguard.
But logistically, what about the tools? They're being sent out with axes, saws, maybe even heavy equipment.
The source mandates a zero-tolerance policy for tool misplacement. Tools are inventoried and signed out with meticulous accountability. Failure to return the entire inventory immediately halts the project and results in severe privilege suspension.
And the task itself is a control mechanism.
It is. The specific task mentioned is constructing their own subcamp cabin, using provided tools and materials.
The work requirement is intense during this phase.
Incredibly so. The men must dedicate 3/4 of their daily work hours to the construction, farming, or resource gathering required for the project. This intensive, focused labor, combined with total self-management, is the final examination.
And the supervision model during this phase is dramatically different.
It's largely free from guard oversight. The guards will check on them perhaps once per day or via remote monitoring of the general area, but the men are expected to manage their own time, labor, and construction process.
So they're trusted with autonomy.
But their performance is rigorously measured against clear task completion deadlines. Failure to meet the deadline or evidence of poor workmanship is treated as a major failure of self-discipline.
The outcome of this phase seems to be the entire point of the camp. It fosters self-reliance, technical skill integration, and continued social skill development, actively preparing men for eventual reintegration in a simulated real-world environment.
This is the point where the philosophy shifts from institutional control to self-control. By giving them the tools, the mission, and the responsibility, and then stepping back, the camp forces them to internalize the discipline and virtue they've been taught.
They learn that they are capable of success without constant supervision.
They prove it not just to the staff, but to themselves, that they are reliable.
And the success of this phase leads directly to the final transition, bypassing years of potential standard incarceration.
Yes. Consistent demonstration of reliability, moral reform, and teamwork aptitude in these autonomous projects makes them immediately eligible for early parole and placement into the external open labor programs. It marks their final, proven return to full societal contribution.
Okay, to make all of this really concrete, we should look at the case study.
To crystallize the profound difference between the philosophy of the proposed model and the status quo, the journal concludes with a detailed hypothetical case study. Let's introduce John.
John is a 32-year-old man convicted of armed bank robbery, a crime that speaks directly to impulse control and financial desperation. He is a divorced father of a 4-year-old son and is facing a 4-year maximum sentence. This is where we see the two philosophies clash on a human level.
Let's analyze his likely trajectory in experience A. The predicted negative outcomes for John in a standard prison experience, according to the source material.
First, the devastating effect on his social and emotional life. Social isolation.
In a standard prison environment, John would experience severe social disconnection. The source predicts limited, highly restricted visitation, often behind glass or via monitored lines, and a general lack of community engagement.
And this actively works to distance him further from his young son during a critical developmental phase.
It fractures essential familial bonds that are proven cornerstones of successful reintegration.
Second, the lack of preparation for the future. Minimal skill acquisition. Without meaningful labor or dedicated skill building, John would spend his time in low-value institutional maintenance jobs.
So he would likely leave prison after 4 years without any marketable skills relevant to the modern economy. This drastically reduces his employability, making him vulnerable to financial stress and increasing the risk of reoffending simply out of economic necessity.
The system contained him, but it failed to empower him.
Exactly. Third, and perhaps most damagingly, psychological deterioration.
Right.
The punitive, often chaotic environment of a standard prison lacks positive role models. John would be exposed to criminal subculture, which actively reinforces antisocial behaviors, often worsening his underlying impulse control issues and mental state.
So he leaves more hardened, more disconnected, and potentially more damaged than when he entered.
That's the source's prediction. And finally, limited rehabilitation. Upon release, John faces immense difficulty reintegrating due to the societal stigma of being incarcerated, compounded by his lack of skills and the damaged familial bonds.
It's a setup for failure, maximizing the chances of recidivism within 5 years. The system failed him by focusing on the past, not the future.
Now, let's contrast that stark trajectory with experience B. The predicted positive outcomes for John under the rehabilitation camp experience.
The first difference is immediate. Social reintegration instead of isolation.
Instead of being isolated, John would be placed in teams, the 2-man and 4-man units. He would engage daily with his specialized guard mentors. He would gradually restore his social aptitude and sense of community, replacing the criminal subculture with a culture of discipline and shared purpose.
Second, skill and trade development offers a path forward.
Through structured labor assignments tailored to his needs, perhaps starting with stone cutting to address his physical aggression, then transitioning to construction apprenticeships, John would learn practical, transferable skills. He gains a tangible asset to take back to the job market.
He leaves with his earned trust fund and a skill certification.
Exactly. Third, the constant presence of positive role models.
The guard mentors.
The guards and staff, acting as dedicated mentors, would demonstrate discipline and virtue in every interaction. This inspires John to reform his own behavior and, crucially, provides him with the positive internal models necessary for self-mastery over the very impulses that led him to armed robbery.
And fourth, the preservation of the essential family reconnection.
The model's inherent goal of gradual reintegration means increased communication privileges and visitation rights, starting almost immediately upon good behavior. This helps John actively maintain and repair his vital relationship with his 4-year-old son throughout his sentence.
Which makes the ultimate transition back home significantly easier and more stable.
And the result of these combined factors is the critical fifth point: higher rehabilitation success. The structured, dignified, and skill-focused environment of the camp dramatically increases the likelihood of John becoming a productive citizen post-release, thereby achieving the camp's stated mission of restoring men to societal contribution.
He is equipped morally, psychologically, and economically for success.
That's the argument.
The comparison is truly stark and summarizes the philosophical difference perfectly. Standard prisons emphasize punishment and isolation, often resulting in men leaving the system more isolated and less capable than when they entered. Rehabilitation camps, as proposed here, emphasize moral restoration, social reintegration, and skill acquisition as a concrete, proven path to societal contribution. The difference lies in the institutional belief that the man can be elevated, not just contained.
If we synthesize the essence of this proposal, we see a highly detailed model aimed at moving the correctional system from a mere instrument of containment to what the journal calls a powerful engine of social and moral uplift.
It's a lofty goal.
It's a very lofty goal. It attempts to truly embody the challenging balance of justice and mercy in equal measure. It replaces time served as the only metric with virtue acquired and discipline demonstrated.
And for you, the learner, the key takeaway is that you now have a clear operational structure for one highly specific, virtue-focused vision of correctional reform. This model argues persuasively that self-respect, which must be earned through demanding labor, constant moral instruction, and a structured path of increasing trust, is the foundational key to reducing recidivism and ensuring successful reintegration.
It's a system designed to give a man back his sense of purpose and competence. The entire system is built on the premise that true reform is not mandated from above, but earned from within.
Right. The source material, particularly when describing the autonomous subcamp projects where these men are building their own shelter, their own resources, and managing their own safety for days at a time, emphasizes that they are working together for something others can never steal from them: self-respect. That final profound act of trust is the capstone of their reformation. This leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. In any correctional system is the opportunity to earn self-respect through meaningful, unsupervised labor. The chance to prove competence and reliability in a high-stakes, real-world context, more profoundly transformative than any amount of mandated education or purely punitive confinement. It suggests that the highest form of reform requires the granting of genuine, measurable trust.